to science and address the question, well, what do we know about the causes of autism? There are a lot of things that we don't know, but fortunately, in part because autism is so frequent and common, we now do have some good evidence as to what some of the causes are. And the best evidence happens to come from my own field of specialization, and that is genetics. It's quite clear that there is a genetic component to autism. There are, in a family, if a child is born with autism, there is a much higher probability that another child will be born in the same family with autism. Moreover, with the completion of the Human Genome Project, which I shouldn't say completion because there's still a lot of information coming out of that, but with the sequencing of the human genome, we now know much more about our DNA and about inheritance and how genes are inherited, and have methods now that allow us to statistically associate variations in DNA with the incidence of genetic disorders, and in fact, things that we at one point thought were not just genetic disorders. It's very clear now that there is a distinct genetic component, and that is the case with autism. Quite a number of genes have now been very clearly associated with autism, and it tends to underscore what I was talking about at the beginning of this presentation, and that is that autism is probably not a single disorder. It would be much easier for us scientifically if it were just one gene that caused autism. But it's very clear that it's not one gene. In fact, there have been over 100 genes now implicated in some way with the incidence of autism. And one of the most exciting studies to come out is one that was, or actually a series of studies published quite recently, directed by Dr. Valerie Hu, that's spelled H-U, at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And Dr. Hu has been able to take behavioral diagnosis of autism and the classifications that people come up with for the different types of autism with biologically identifiable cases in genetics. And what she has found is that it is beneficial to categorize autism into 4 categories. One of them being very severe language impaired, which is the category my son falls into. Another with intermediate symptoms, one with very mild, which we often call Asperger's syndrome. And then the autistic savant, which was made famous in the movie Rain Man, where certain people with autism are capable of speaking quite well, but also have extraordinary abilities to memorize even trivial data that most of us would not be able to retain in our heads. What Dr. Hu has been able to do is show that these are biologically distinct, not just something that's categorized with behavioral analysis. And the way she has done it is she has taken peripheral blood lymphocytes. These are cells that are part of our immune system that circulate in the blood. And she has taken those and looked not just at the genes, but at gene expression. In other words, which genes are turned on and which ones are turned off. And she began her studies with identical twins that were discordant for autism, meaning that they had essentially the same genetic constitution, but but they differed in the expression of autism. And by so doing, she was able to determine which genes were unusually or differentially turned on in children with autism. And by identifying which ones were, she noticed that the expression of certain genes in a subsequent study correlated well with the behavioral characteristics, to the point that she can now use this biological method to diagnose beforehand what particular type of autism a child will have without any behavioral testing on it, and determine which of those 4 categories the child will fall into. And that, in my mind, is one of the most important discoveries made in recent years, because we are now on the edge of a biological diagnosis of autism rather than simply a behavioral diagnosis of autism. And moreover, by identifying which genes are involved in autism, and interestingly, the genes that she identified in her study also correlate closely, are the same genes in many cases, with those identified in the more traditional genetic studies, where we look for cases of inheritance in a family and look at which genes are mutated, that is, have different variants in their DNA. And in that, and so it's showing a very strong association of certain genes. The benefit there is that then we are able to now get a handle on what the biological causes of autism are by identifying which genes are associated with autism, and in so doing then can use science to hopefully come up with treatments that really are effective and that treat the biological nature of autism rather than just using the hit and miss sort of behavioral or the hit and miss application of medications, just seeing which ones are going to work in a particular child's case and which ones might not work. And so for those of us who are parents of autistic children, this has been a great step forward, and gives us hope that something is coming. And by the way, this gives me a chance to put in a plug. We are hosting an Autism Conference this coming Monday, April 11th at UVU, and Dr. Hu, whom I've just mentioned, will be one of our keynote speakers for that conference. And so we're very fortunate to have her here. She, by the way, is also the parent of an autistic child, and that's what helped direct her passion for the work that she does. And so we're very, very excited to have her here. We have a number of other important speakers who will be coming. It will be an all-day conference, and it is open to the public. And so if any of you are interested in coming, please look it up on the UVU website. The registration is available, and we'd love to have you come attend and hear these speakers if you're able to do so. So anyway, for me then, that has been exciting to see that the genetic component of autism is now beginning to be clear. Interestingly, some of the best studies on the genetics of autism have come from the state of Utah. The University of Utah has began not long ago, about a little over a decade ago, began an extensive study on autism. And Utah happens to be one of the best places for doing these sorts of studies, because in part because people in Utah tend to be very generally well educated and very concerned about the health of their families. And so because of that, diagnosis tends to be better in this state. Moreover, as many of you know, the medical care in the state of Utah is some of the best in the nation. The University of Utah Medical Center is one of the one of the best places for medical research. And moreover, because families in Utah tend to keep good track of their genealogy and have, in general, larger families than usual, it makes it an ideal situation for studying human genetics. And some of the finest studies on human genetics have come from the state of Utah, so we can be very proud of that. But also some of the most important conclusions on autism have come from the state of Utah. And among those was the discovery, a fairly important one, that there appears to be an association with clinical depression and autism. And in that many children diagnosed with autism are born to mothers who had been diagnosed with clinical depression long before the child was conceived. And that has come out of that was one of the major findings to come out of the studies in Utah. By the way, my son is one of the subjects. In fact, our entire family is one of the subjects, have been participating in that study, which is, interestingly, a holistic study. In other words, it looks at behavioral as well as biomedical characteristics. But quite a number of the strong genetic associations with autism have come out of the University of Utah, and it has been a marvelous project. So we can give much credit to the researchers who are here working in this state. And as we draw now toward the end, the last thing that I would like to do is pay tribute to the many people who, particularly members of families who have children with autism, but also the dedicated teachers and caregivers who devote their lives to it. They are, I like to say that whatever they're paid, it's not nearly enough, and that certainly can be identified. They work in jobs that are extremely demanding and do so with enormous dedication, and largely because they have such a great love for the children they are serving. Much as the families have that love, those who provide the care and who work with them likewise have it, and are very dedicated to the work that they are doing. And it truly makes an enormous difference for those of us who are family members to see the love and the care that they can provide, and the expertise, the professional expertise that they bring to what they are doing. And in fact, one of our support coordinator happens to be here today with us in the group, and for those of us who are members of families of children with autism, we are so grateful for the wonderful work that they do, and for those also in administrative capacity who have to make difficult decisions about how we go forward with these things to help us make a difference in the lives of these children. And so I'd like to pay them a great tribute of thanks. What I've done here now is just a very brief sketch of my son Michael. As I mentioned, he's now 19 years old. Very happy young man who loves life in many ways, who sees it through very different eyes than we do, but nonetheless has a great love for life and great fascination with the things that are there, and has clearly changed the lives of all of us who associate with him, and has touched us in many ways. Now, what I've done here, of course, is just a brief sketch. For me to finish one of these would take probably about 14 hours to get a good portrait finished. But I did bring a photo of him here for you to see.